Alas, poor Justin. I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest. So that's Shakespeare from Hamlet, right? Did Shakespeare wear a beaver hat? Interesting question, because his dates are essentially 1564 to 1616, and the last quarter of the 16th century was the advent of beaver hats, or maybe the re-advent in Europe. So this episode of WDHM-TV is a discussion of our founding animal, the beaver. It's difficult to overemphasize the role the beaver played in the settlement of North America. It's the reason why Europeans came here in the first place. Now we give Cadillac the benefit of being the human founder of Detroit, at least for the European settlement. But of course this guy is the reason why people came here in the first place. So let's talk about our friend the beaver. First of all, the beaver is a rodent, and it's difficult when you ask the kids, what is this animal? They always point to his teeth, which are characteristic of rodents. In fact, rodentia, the order, is from the Latin word rodere, which means to gnaw. So these are gnawing animals, and he's a member of the largest or third of all mammalian species. Rodentia is huge. And this is a big rodent. The only bigger one is an animal called the capybara, which is in South America, and it looks to me in photographs sort of like a small hippopotamus. And that animal is also semi-aquatic, just like our friend the beaver. So the beaver is a rodent. His closest relatives in the animal kingdom are squirrels. The kids relate to those bushy-tailed animals that climb trees and so on and so forth. So squirrels are his closest relatives, and in fact, as a ground squirrel, if you think about a woodchuck or a groundhog, these guys resemble those animals fairly closely. So squirrels are their closest relatives now. The beaver has been around for about 20 million years. Now they separated from their squirrel relatives. The predecessor of the beaver separated from the predecessors of our modern day squirrels about 90 million years ago. So they've been on their own for quite a while. Our species, in fact, there are two species extant, but ours is about 7 million years old, based on relatively recent fossil evidence from Oregon, if you want to know. So that's the ancestry a little bit of our rodent friend, the beaver. So what are the physical characteristics that set the beaver apart? It's a semi-aquatic animal. Totally aquatic animal is something like a seal or a dolphin or a whale. So this is not an animal that is totally at home in the water. On the other hand, they do fairly well on land as well as very well in the water. So they're semi-aquatic. And what makes them semi-aquatic? What are its features? The kids are fond of poking their fingers in his ears, and you'll find them poking their fingers in his nose. And indeed, there are valves in both the ears and the nose which close off when they go underwater and keep the water out of their noses and their ears. Their eyes have something called a nictitating membrane, which is a clear membrane that comes down over their eyes when they dive, which provides a goggle-like effect, so they come with built-in swim goggles. Furthermore, the beaver can close his lips behind his incisors, so he can close off the rest of his mouth and continue to gnaw on wood underwater, which becomes relevant, of course, when he's cutting up things underwater or whatever. The beaver's hind feet are webbed, not the forefeet. His forefeet or front paws are not webbed, and they're very dexterous. He handles things, and like handling the stick that he's eating the bark off of here. So those are the adaptations to the semi-aquatic environment. Other characteristics of the beaver include his teeth. Can't forget his teeth. Now this is an upper incisor, and when placed over the beaver's skull, you can see that the incisor goes way back into the head. This animal is all incisor. He's all front tooth. And you notice as well that the teeth, his incisors are yellow. His molars back here are white, but his incisors are yellow. The enamel is on the front of the incisor, the dentin is in the back, and the enamel is yellow because iron is substituted for calcium in the beaver's tooth, making it stronger. Now we all know about the gnawing ability of the beaver, and we know about his sharp teeth. In fact, the Native Americans used beaver teeth as part of their canoe repair kits. They would take them along with them as tools. And if you look at the incisors, when the beaver is busy gnawing something, his upper and lower incisors closely mesh, and indeed the lower incisors wear away the dentin on the inside of the upper incisors, rendering the both upper and lower incisors very sharp. So when he's biting something, as we do, he moves his jaw forward. When he's chomping on the bark that he's chomped off the branch, his molars oppose. If you can see his molars opposing here, and then his incisors opposing here. So that's his teeth. They keep growing throughout their lives. In fact, the beaver, as a rodent, will continue growing throughout his life. So the teeth grow, and if they don't gnaw, then they will grow. They'll grow too long, and they'll basically kill the beaver. If he loses one of his incisors, the same thing will happen. So that's his teeth. The beaver, of course, the reason, of course, that Cadillac and the other fur traders wanted the beaver pelts is because of the fur. So we should talk about that a little bit. His fur, as you know from the samples we have, is lustrous and very, very thick. It's comprised of two layers. The under layer is what the people who wanted to make felt out of the beaver fur were after, the softer, denser stuff. And then there are guard hairs, which are the longer hairs that you see sticking out on at least one of our samples. The reason the guard hairs were worn off when the Native Americans wore beaver pelts, they wore them fur to the body rather than fur away, as our fashionable, people used to do as a fashion. So the fur is dense. The beaver oils his fur, or her fur, with oil made by oil glands called the castoreum sacs near the anus. Beaver fur is not naturally waterproof. The beaver gets oil from these glands and then smears it on the fur to make it waterproof. And for that reason, because the fur is not naturally waterproof, beaver hats would have to have something added to make them waterproof, if that's what the desire of the hat maker was. The fur is dense enough that it traps air and allows for some insulation of the fur. But being semi-aquatic, the beavers are not as resistant to cold as other fully aquatic mammals like whales and porpoises and so forth. In fact, they'll get cold if they stay underwater for very long. The duration of before they start to get hypothermic is about 20 minutes underwater, or 20 minutes in the water in the winter. Then they have to get into the lodge or up on land to warm up a little bit. So that's the beaver's fur. Can't forget the tail, right? That's the other thing the kids always go for, the tail and the teeth. The tail on the beaver has 5 functions for the beaver. There's some functions that it has for people as well, but the 5 functions for the beaver include, of course, signaling, the slapping on the water, and my observation would be that the beaver slaps his tail at varying speeds and varying strengths depending on what he wants to signal. Or that's my supposition. Anything from a big bavoosh like a kid doing a cannonball into the lake to a fairly faint slap. But in any case, signaling is one function of the beaver's tail. The second one is as a rudder. The beaver's back feet are webbed, the front feet are not. he just paddles steadily with his back feet and then steers with his tail, so it acts as a rudder. A third function is as a prop. When he's gnawing down a tree, you need 3 legs on the stool for stability, so he uses his hind feet and his tail. And then sort of they stand up next to the tree that they're cutting down. So that's another function. The next function is as a temperature regulator. Through closing off or opening up blood vessels into the tail, the beaver can either let more blood, therefore more heat, go to the environment, to the water, or he can close those blood vessels down, which tends to conserve heat and keep the heat in the core of the animal. So during the winter, the blood flow to the tail would be curtailed when he's underwater, and in the summer he might let more blood to the tail. Not a conscious function. It's like us, and we regulate our blood flow too, unconsciously. And the last function for the beaver is as a fat storage organ. Now, the beaver accumulates fat during the summer months, or summer and fall, to use during the winter when times can be leaner. And that is then we get into one of the functions of the beaver's tail for humans. Because of the fat was sought after because it's high energy food. So Native Americans considered the beaver tail a delicacy. In fact, Europeans adopted the idea of eating beaver's tail because it was available, and the Catholic Church even approved of beaver tail as a fish because it was scaled. Maybe the whole beaver, I'm not clear on that. But in any case, Catholics were allowed to eat beaver tail on Friday because it was scaled and declared by the Catholic Church to be a fish. So that's the physical aspects of the beaver. We can now turn to the family life of the beaver. The family life, the beavers are monogamous. If a mate dies, they'll quickly acquire another mate, but they're considered to be monogamous animals. And they raise 1 litter of kits per year, born in May. And the number of kits will vary according to how good the food supply is and things like that, usually 2 to 4. That's a fairly low rate of reproduction for a rodent if you consider mice, rabbits, rats, and so on and so forth. So the beaver doesn't reproduce vigorously and has 1 litter every May. Now, when the May litter is born, that first year, the kits are fairly helpless and they're not much use around the house. However, by the time they reach their second year, they are helpful around the house, and the second year kits will look after the first year kits as sort of babysitters while the adults go about their business of building lodges, building dams, collecting food for the winter, and so on and so forth. In the fall of the beaver's second year, they're kicked out of the house and made to go fend for themselves. That's a big danger time for beaver young because they're fairly defenseless when they're waddling along forest paths looking for another stream to build a dam across. So that's the family life of the beaver. The beaver's habitat is, of course, the water. In North America, especially in the Great Lakes region, beavers are fond of damming up rivers or culverts and any flowing water and making ponds behind them. We all know this. We all know that that's what they do. The European beaver, the European species, castor fiber, builds lodges along the banks of the river. North American beavers do that too. Like, for example, there was a beaver reported in the Detroit River. In all likelihood, that beaver would have if the beaver hung around for the winter, would have a bank-based lodge. They put the sticks and mud against the bank, and they can also burrow into the bank. So the beaver looks for running water in North America, and the Great Lakes region in Ontario with its million lakes is prime beaver territory. As we know, the beaver builds dams and they build lodges. Their dams are constructed by poking sticks into the bottom of the river vertically and then lacing smaller sticks and whatnot in amongst them, using mud and rocks as sealant and as a final coating. When the dam is built, then of course the water level behind that dam rises, and then affords protection for the beaver and a place to build the lodge. Now, the lodge is there is a 2-room house. One reference I read said 3 rooms, the third being a bathroom, but it's at least a 2-room house. And these things can vary from about 15 to 40 feet on the bottom, and then rise to a conical top of maybe 6 feet in diameter at the water surface. And the way they build them isn't by looking at a set of blueprints and nailing up 2x4s and so on and so forth, or the beaver equivalent. What they do is they pile a great big bunch of sticks in the middle of their pond, and then they burrow up from under and create their house. The lodges have an underwater entrance. So they basically work from the inside. It's like having the lumber yard dump all the construction material for your house in your yard, and then working from the underside up to build your house. But it works for the beaver. The house consists of a lower level, or a room as I like to call it, but a lower level which is sort of a place to get out of the water and dry off, and then an upper level which is to live in and is usually festooned with bark and leaves and things like that they can keep warm with. So that's the lodge. The lodge is really overwintering. That's what they use for overwintering. They don't really necessarily need or use a lodge in the summer, and they can fall into disrepair in the summer. In the fall, they'll rebuild their lodge or build one de novo. And the last stage in building their lodge is to coat the thing with mud just before freeze up. So when that mud freezes, it'll keep even a determined wolf or bear from breaking in. Will not keep a determined Native American from breaking in, but it'll frustrate their major animal kingdom predators. So that's their lodge and their dams. In addition to those constructs, they also will dig canals so that they can bring wood from a ways away by water, which is of course safe for them, to the pond. Over the winter, for the overwinter supply of food, they poke sticks into the bottom of the pond, and these piles may protrude above the top of the pond, as a matter of fact. So that's where they live and how they do it. And if you reflect on this, I'm describing an animal which does more to change its own environment for its own purposes than any other animal except us. And I think it's probably those characteristics, the way that the beaver, the Native Americans were very familiar with them, of course, and with their habits, their family life, the way they construct things and so forth, that led some Native Americans to believe that they were human, except that they couldn't talk. And of course, the beavers attributed great feats like damming up the St. Mary's, creating the St. Mary's Sioux Rapids to make Lake Superior. And the beavers also credited with good sense, and not the Native Americans quickly learned that the French had no beavers left in Europe, and they knew that they were safe in providing beaver fur for the French, because no sensible animal would ever swim across that salty ocean and go to France. I don't think they were singling out the country France, but there you are. So that's the beaver, his physical characteristics, his environment or his habitat. I guess the food that the beaver likes, we all think of beavers gnawing on trees, and indeed they do. A beaver can take down a 6-inch tree in about 20 minutes. That's not bad. And the types of bark that they like to eat are primarily willow, poplar, aspen, maple, and wild cherry. They don't like conifers, but they will eat bark from them in a pinch. What they're going for isn't the surface layer of bark; it's the layer under that, between the wood and the surface layer of bark. And by the way, the reason that they like one type of bark over another is because they are better able to use the nutrients in one type of bark over the other. It's not that they think the wild cherry trees are pretty or anything like that. And I think you've all seen examples of beaver wood. If you look at the end of this is typical tooth marks of the way a beaver would take a branch off of a tree. And if you look at the bark, you can see where his incisors have taken the bark right off the tree. If you've ever seen a video of a beaver working on a stick of wood, it's like a cartoon of human beings eating an ear of corn. It's sort of chomp, 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 chomp. So they're pretty efficient at taking the bark off of wood. However, their preferred food, when they can get it in the summer, are things like water lilies and sedge and soft food like that. Not that they're going for soft, but those foods have more nutrients per unit of effort than do trees, which after all they have to cut down and drag to the water and so on and so forth. I didn't mention the size of beavers, and that's something the kids often ask about. A beaver nowadays will range between about 40 and 65 pounds full grown. I've seen different figures mentioned. The largest beaver on record is 110 pounds, one that was caught in Wisconsin. Now, they were probably bigger than that in years past when they weren't so molested by people. But 110 pounds is a pretty big beaver. The fossil record shows us that there were beavers of about 220 pounds and about 6 feet long. There's some reference in older works to a beaver that was in the millions of years ago that was as large as a black bear. But that estimate was evidently because of misapprehensions on how to gauge size by fossils. So there really wasn't one as large as a black bear. But a 220-pound beaver, maybe that's where the road got its name. It's a pretty large animal anyway. Another thing I should mention about fur is the characteristics of the fur that make for hats. Because after all, that's what the Europeans were after primarily. They were after material to make waterproof or waterproof with waterproofing, durable, warm hats. Beaver fur, all hair and fur has the shaft will have hooks off of it. The beaver furs is blessed or cursed, if you're from the point of view of the beaver, with a lot of hooks. If you think of it as Velcro, you won't be too far off. That is, if a piece of Velcro, a square of Velcro has just a few hooks here and there, it's not going to stick very well. But if the Velcro is densely populated with hooks, then, as you know, the Velcro sticks very thoroughly. So that's a characteristic of beaver fur that made it amenable to felting and making a felt that would sustain wide brims. The wide-brimmed hat came along when beaver was used for felting. But now we're getting off topic, I think. We're getting into the fur trade and why that happened. So I'll quit on that. So this is our founding animal. He's interesting in and of himself, and of course he's interesting because of what he precipitated. That is the fur trade and the settlement of this part of North America. I'm sure that a number of you are interested in learning more about the beaver, and if you aren't, you'll be polite when I suggest to you there are two books. I'll mention the scholarly one first. The Beaver by an author named Dietland Mueller Schwartz. I got this copy on eBay, so it's readily available. This is the second edition. So this is a reference I see cited by papers and by other authors for the beaver. The beaver, its life and impact. If you want to have fun reading about the beaver, then I would suggest this book, Once They Were Hats, by Frances, and you'll love the last name, Backhouse, which, as you all know, is a synonym for outhouse. She's a Canadian writer. She writes nonfiction. I'd call her sort of a journalist from her past, but how she identifies herself as a creative writer, creative nonfiction writer. And this is a lot of fun. It covers the main aspects of the beaver, the animal, the fur trade, and so on and so forth, but it extends it into the modern day. As you probably know, you can still buy beaver hats. They're called, by and large, cowboy hats. And you can spend, several $100s for one, depending on the content of beaver fur and the felt that makes up the hat. Anyway, I'd recommend this book as a fun read that'll impart a lot of information about the beaver. Well, thank you very much for listening.